Let's talk about one of the most fascinating and honestly brutal power dynamics in all of history. We're diving into the relationship between Rome's very first emperors and its ancient, powerful Senate.
You know, the entire story of the early Roman Empire really boils down to this one question. Were they partners trying to govern the known world together, or were they locked in this constant, often deadly rivalry for who was really in charge? Well, let's get into it.
And to kick things off, just listen to this absolutely savage take from the historian Tacitus. He suggests that the Senate was so broken, so scared, that it was practically begging for a master. But was it really that simple? I'm not so sure.
To understand how it all went so wrong, we have to start with the man who literally wrote the playbook, Augustus. He's the one who created the template for how an emperor should handle the Senate, and it was this incredible balancing act of respect on one hand and total control on the other.
Okay, so on the surface, Augustus was all about showing respect. He did things that looked great. He trimmed the Senate's bloated numbers down to a more effective size, he treated senators like they were his peers, and he even set up a special council just to work with them. He told them to speak their minds, and he never punished them for it. It really looked like a partnership.
And this is the absolute key to everything. For all these nice gestures, the reality was something else entirely. The Senate, just totally exhausted after a century of bloody civil war, basically just handed all of its power over to Augustus. So he became their master, sure, but he did it with a smile. And that set a very complicated and very dangerous precedent for everyone who came after him.
So after Augustus, we get his successor, Tiberius. And with him, the whole relationship gets a lot darker, a lot murkier. All those clear lines that Augustus tried to draw, yeah, they start to get really blurry. This is the huge debate that the ancient historians themselves were having. It gets right to the heart of his reign. Was he being genuinely humble when he seemed reluctant to rule, or was it all just an act, a performance to see who was truly loyal and who wasn't?
And you can see this historical debate play out perfectly right here. On one side, you've got Suetonius, who tells us Tiberius showed excessive courtesy, that he saw himself as a servant and would even let the Senate overrule his decisions. But then you have Tacitus, who gives us a much more cynical take. He thought all that hesitation was a trick, and that behind closed doors, Tiberius thought the senators were fit to be slaves and couldn't stand how subservient they were, even though his own confusing behavior was causing it.
Okay, so if Tiberius was all about dark, confusing ambiguity, what came next was a full-on explosion. I'm talking about Gaius, who you probably know better as Caligula. Under him, any pretense of partnership wasn't just ignored, it was completely shattered.
And you can watch his terrifyingly fast ascent right here. He starts out great. The Senate gives him absolute power, and at first, he seems really democratic. But that goes south fast. Pretty soon, he's treating the Senate with, quote, absolute contempt. And by the end of his very short reign, he was literally making plans to murder the entire Senate.
And if you need one story to show you just how much contempt he had for them, look no further than this. This is the infamous story of his favorite horse, Incitatus. Caligula actually declared he was going to make his horse a senator. It was the ultimate insult, a way to show them just how useless and pathetic he thought they were.
So after Caligula is unsurprisingly assassinated, in comes Claudius. He was this really unlikely emperor who basically had to clean up the mess. He tried to bring some dignity back to the relationship, but, well, his reign was just a whole bundle of contradictions.
So on the one hand, Claudius really seemed to respect the Senate. He encouraged debate, he even gave them back control over some provinces. But on the other hand, he totally sidelined them by building this powerful new government bureaucracy run by his own inner circle of former slaves. And when he felt threatened, he could be absolutely ruthless.
And yeah, for all his talk of goodwill, the reality could be pretty grim. According to Suetonius, Claudius had 35 senators and over 300 knights executed during his reign. So, an awkward truce, yes, but for some, a very deadly one.
All right, this brings us to the final act in our drama, Nero. His time as emperor starts with so much promise, and it ends in a complete and total meltdown of the relationship between the emperor and the Senate.
I mean, listen to this. These were Nero's own words at the start of his reign. He promised he'd be just like Augustus and respect the Senate's traditional role. And for a Senate that had just been through Caligula and Claudius, this was exactly what they wanted to hear.
But, as you can guess, that promise quickly fell apart. In the beginning, while his powerful advisors Seneca and Burrus were around, things were mostly okay. But after they were gone, and especially after a major conspiracy against him involving a lot of senators, Nero's paranoia just exploded. Mass executions followed. And by the end, just like Caligula before him, he was reportedly planning to wipe out what was left of the senatorial class.
But this time, something was different. Before Nero could make his move, the Senate did something they hadn't dared to do before. With rebellions popping up in the provinces, they finally found their backbone and declared their own emperor Ahastus Publicus, a public enemy.
And let's be crystal clear about what this meant. This wasn't just some political statement. This was a death sentence. It meant Nero had no legal protections and any Roman citizen could kill him on sight, no questions asked. Faced with that, Nero took his own life.
So, we end right back where we started. After this whole cycle of fake respect, suspicion, contempt, and finally open rebellion, you have to ask, who's really to blame here? Did the Senate's weakness and fear create these monsters? Or did the absolute power of the emperors make it impossible for them to be anything but weak? It's a fundamental question about power that goes way beyond ancient Rome. What do you think?